Hello, fellow basement dweller. In today's video, I'll be talking about the Necrons from 40k. I will be talking about them as a species, their entire history, and them and their impact in the current setting, and some notable characters. And please stay tuned because at the end of the video, I will be talking about some things that have been going on with the channel. Please enjoy today's video.
Carter, you've discovered the holy grail of modern medicine. Why the hell would you keep it back?
So, essentially, the Necrons, low-key, will kind of cancel patients. Their entire species would have massive super cancel. Like, I'm not talking, like, cancel. I'm talking, like, the worst cancel. Like, the worst cancel a human could get is the average Necron cancel. It would be so rare, so uncommon for a Necron to live to, like, 45. It was well for Necrons to live to like 30. These guys were dropping because of the worst tumors possible. Their entire body would be covered in tumors. It was horrible. And they used kind of a dynasty system to govern. And on top of that, they were very ambitious, despite everything setting them back, despite their son just absolutely hating them, and despite the fact that their ozone layer just didn't even exist. They were very tenacious, and they were relatively technologically advanced. And they also had this strange metal called necrodermis that was kind of like the highlight of their technology. Think about, like, if you were to make a gun out of necrodermis and, like, you were to break it, it could just kind of regenerate on its own. So, it's essentially just super metal that can regenerate. Essentially, just imagine magical vibranium. And they eventually got off of their planet. It took them decades, and it was not the kind of, I guess, good, noble space travel. Okay, I don't know what I mean noble space travel, but it was very primitive space travel. It wasn't this. They would essentially cryo-freeze you, put you in a small tube, and then shoot you off into a planet, and they would then just shoot hundreds of people off on the random planets. And this didn't work. It got people off the planet, and they'd kind of do the same thing with their supplies. And, you know, they made it to other planets. Now, the Necrons were very intelligent. They knew that their skin cancel, this god-awful cancel on their planet, they wanted the exact opposite. They wanted to go from Australia to England, essentially. So they would set up shop on ice planets, on smog planets, on this god-awful, just disgusting climate like you have in London kind of planets, just to avoid the sun. Very mountainousy planets, so they wouldn't have to go outside a lot. And they found out very quickly that it wasn't their lack of ozone layer that was causing their cancel. It was their DNA was just so corrupted. And even though you could have Necrons, 10 generations without even seeing the sun would still have skin cancel and all sorts of horrible cancel. Now, in case you're wondering what cancel, like, actually is, now again, I'm not an expert, I just watched some YouTube videos, like, just be that warned. But cancel is essentially when your DNA is self-replicating, because, you know, that whole thing of your body completely gets replaced every 7 years, it essentially just doesn't replicate properly and creates improper cells, and these improper cells don't listen, and that's why they multiply so much, and that's why it causes so much damage. And causing damage to your DNA and your cells can make it more likely the way you get cancer. That's why, you know, the sun's kind of bad for you. It damages your skin. That's why you get sunburns. You might get skin cancer. You know, I mean, you dive face first into radioactive water, you might get all sorts of cancers. Your DNA on a microscopic level is just dog water. You're gonna get cancer no matter what you do, so poor Necrons. Anyway, after they made it to all these different planets, the dynasty system stayed in power, and necrodermis became even more widespread, and they were able to use this metal to make spaceships and all sorts of wild technology. But the Necrons, kind of like humans, were very, very petty and would constantly infight. And, you know, now they're at a point where they had ships, all this stuff, and they're still infighting, going off-world to infight, all this stuff. Necrons were constantly fighting each other. Until eventually, they found this godlike race known as the Old Ones. Essentially, just imagine a bunch of fat psychic wizards. Okay, just imagine an entire species of God Emperor of Mankind. Except instead of Giga Chad, just imagine Fat Cormac the Frog. So, yeah, these guys were really, really cool. Massive cycles. Each old one was a big boy cycle. If a Tau and a Necron is like a candle, and a human is like a torch, and an Eldoi is like a koi file, an old one is like a massive wildfire. It's a nuke. Imagine an old one is like a nuke or a massive wildfire, just a massive cycle. And they found the old ones, and they pretty much said, oh my god, these godlike beings, they can kill or cancel, they can help us. And they pretty much went up to them and were like, hey, please help us, please. And the old ones will kind of just like, ew, get out of here. Okay, that's not entirely accurate. They will pretty much just went on a monologue of, we are the old ones, the super waste of the galaxy. It is our job to go around spreading and protecting life in the galaxy. They're the kind of stereotypical ancient waste that goes around seeding life in the galaxy. And the Necrons were like, oh my god, it's true. You really can help us. And then the old ones are like, you know, we didn't create you guys in particular, so, can you guys kind of leave? Yeah. Your destiny is your own to make, yada yada yada, even though we could easily fix your cancel, get wrecked. Now the Necrons were a little angry. And not having anything to take their anger out, were about to almost drive themselves to extinction due to infighting, until a Necron of incredible status would pick up an ancient position among the Necron race known as the Silent King, where a Necron of prestige would pick up this title and would essentially lead the faction. And a Necron picked up this title and led the Necrons to war against the old ones. Now, what happens when an entire race of cancel patients fights an entire race of gods? They got absolutely bodied. Like, it wasn't much of a fight. It was more along the lines of the Necrons would show up with their entire army, and there'll be like two old ones there just like chilling, and the old one would just like wave their hand and just defeat the entire army. So yeah, not a very bit of an L on the Necrons. Now, the Necrons were licking their wounds, and the Silent King was molding. There was really nothing they could do. Many Necron dynasties began to stop listening to the Silent King and began to infight. Until eventually, they found this weird kind of thing orbiting one of their stars. This thing orbiting their stars that they picked up on their sensors. They had no idea what it was. They were very confused, but it kind of went to the Silent King and made a deal with him. That the Silent King would use Necrodomus to create this new race of godlike beings known as the Catan, these metal Necrodomus bodies, and in exchange for this, the Catan would lead the Necrons on a crusade to kill all of the old ones. And on top of this, they would not only kill their cancel, they would also give them immortality. Now, the Silent King was very ecstatic. The Silent King was ecstatic. The Silent King was so happy that all of their troubles were about to be over, and they were about to defeat their ancient enemy. Because guess what? Who else hated the old ones? The Catan did, because they fought a war a long time ago and were defeated also. But with these new Necrodomus bodies and the help of the Necrons, they could defeat them. Now, the Catan that they were speaking to was this silly little guy called the Deceiver. Now, the only real Necron to protest about making this alliance and these deals with these godlike beings was this one little node called Orkin. But don't worry, Orkin's just a big node, and he's just, for whatever reason, doesn't want the Necrons to literally solve all of their problems. What a node. Let's just ignore him. So they forged these godlike beings in the white world. These are just straight up gods. These metal Necrodomus bodies, and also one thing to note is that the Catan could kind of speak to the Necrons when they were gaseous form, but it was almost like fragmented consciousness, like only like a portion of them was awake. And one of the Catan who The only other Catan who would really kind of whisper to the Necrons was the Void Dragon, and he's the kind of the guy who helped the Necron scientists make the metal bodies, so that's a little reason why they're OP, because the Void Dragon is essentially the god of machines. Now, with all of the Catan having these new, big, strong metal bodies, they then decided to cure the Necron's cancer and give them immortality. They just had to walk into these big, giant metal machines that would cure them of all of their sicknesses and make them immortal. Of course, the military and the nobility were the first ones to run into these furnaces willingly. Killing devices willingly, of course. And they were tricked, and their flesh was burnt away, replaced with metal, and their souls were consumed by the Catan, making them even more powerful. And after the Necron military and nobility was turned into these unstoppable metal machines, the Necron Teal, which were the Necrons before the biotransference, were now extinct. It was now just the Necrons. And they forcibly drugged all remaining Necron Teal into the biotransference, so that way their new masters, the Catan, could then feast upon their souls. And also, one thing to note is the Necrons are soulless, but it's kind of weird to describe. Just imagine, the average Necron, of course, kind of got the equivalent of a Ford Focus of a body, if that makes any sense, while the nobility got like Bugattis, if that makes any sense. The Necron nobility, on the other hand, are still hyper-intelligent, master tacticians. There's this one absolute giga-chad called Emotech the Stormlord. He's just a baller. He is the master of strategy, greatest strategist in all 40k. Don't worry, he won't be important later, but he's just a master strategist, best strategist ever, Emotech the Stormlord. And, you had all these, generals, nobility, who were still hyper-intelligent, but were still enslaved to the Catan. Meanwhile, the average Necron is just essentially a death toaster. Now, all of their Catan and the Silent King, who is now their puppet. Now, one thing to note is that the Necrons are enslaved to the Catan, but, for the most part, they're enslaved to the Silent King, who's enslaved to the Catan. So, for the most part, it's the Catan telling the Silent King to do this, and then the Necrons then listen to the Silent King. But the Catan can just, go up to a Necron noble and be like, do this. But for the most part, it's the first route. Now, anyway, that doesn't matter. Now, the Catan and the Silent King waged a bloody war against the Old Ones. So much so that dozens, if not thousands, of Old Ones were killed, and they were forced to make a new race to help them fight off the Necron and the Catan, known as the Eldoi. And they also gave the Eldoi a sick-ass pantheon of gods to help them defeat the Catan. Some of these Eldoi gods were little nodes like Kegawak, god of laughter, and Isha, god of healing, while some of them were absolute chads like Cain, the Eldoi god of war. As Eldoi gods fought Catan, and as Eldoi fought Necrons, the war still wasn't going well for everyone's favorite frog boys, so they made this other war race called the Quark. Now again, I'm not going to touch on the Eldoi and Quarks too long, but the Eldoi were kind of like the main ways. They're almost like a partner, as opposed to just a servant. The Quarks were incredibly rushed out. Meanwhile, the Quarks were just supposed to be heavy, expendable shock troops. Now, the war in heaven lasted a very, very, very long time, with trillions, octillions of deaths on both sides. This is a war the likes of which the galaxy would never see again, making the Horus Heresy look like the 4th of July. Now, eventually, the Necron and Catan would win this war by killing all of the Old Ones. But they didn't kill all of the Eldoi and Orcs. Well, I should say Quarks. Now, after this, the Catan developed even bigger egos and began to use their Necrons no different than chess pieces. Well, obviously they were doing that before, but now it was for no real reason besides entertainment. Began to use the Necrons as chess pieces in pointless wars to settle petty arguments, and began to take the Necrons around the galaxy and force them to exterminate and extract the souls of trillions of different races, cleansing the galaxy of almost all alien life. And the Catan grew even bigger and fatter and stronger off of their souls. Now, eventually, after a long time of this, the Silent King began to reawaken fully, no longer as a puppet, but as a king. And a king does not serve thirsting gods. And so overnight, the Eldoi went from possibly their lowest point, being nothing but playthings for thirsting gods, to overthrowing those gods, making war with them, and shadowing them into pieces. The strongest of these gods, the Void Dragon, had several black stone fortresses fire at him at once, shadowing him in the shards, his biggest shard fleeing to Mars, but that's not important to the Necrons. They would then take these thirsting gods and force them in the vaults, using them as batteries / enslaved Pokemon. Yeah, the Catan are beings of limitless energy, and they would essentially put them in these unique vaults that would siphon their energy to act as A, an energy source. I mean, who doesn't need a free AA battery every here and then? And B, also to keep them contained, because if they keep pressing the walls, eventually those walls are going to wear down, but if they keep sucking all their energy out, then they won't be able to escape. Not to mention, when they're in these fragmented shards as opposed to whole, they are much more manageable. Now, one of these Catan straight up was completely destroyed by the Necrons. He was known as the Flail, and his last act was to curse the Necrons with the Flail curse, which is essentially a weird kind of disease the Necrons have, where if you hang around a Flail, you'll become one. It'll start out with, you'll have a little voice inside your head that makes you want to eat and just rip apart and flay, but you'll just see it as disgusting and you won't think about it. Now, the Flails are really sentient. Like, you'll have a non-sentient, just random Necron who has the sentience of a toaster, and randomly he'll almost have full sentience like he was, a Necron tier again, but that sentience is just almost like a drug addict wanting to get their next hit. Well, eventually, in secret, after a battle, they'll go off and just rub meat trying to eat it, but they have no mouth, so they're essentially just rub meat all over themselves, and they'll wash themselves off and then head back into their tomb. And this will happen again and again and again until it's very noticeable that it's a flayed one, because they can't hide it anymore, and they'll be expelled or exterminated from their dynasty. Now, the Necrons can't reproduce. That's a bit of an L. Now, one thing they can do is, if a Necron dies, they can, give him a new body. Again, the Necrons is kind of like an imprint of what they used to be, so they can't just take that imprint and re-imprint it. But that's really expensive and takes a lot of resources, so usually only high-ranking members of Dynasty can use it. They're not exactly doing it for every random Necron. It'd be like trying to equip every US soldier with a diamond sword and armor. Okay, I'm sorry. But you get what I mean. So every dead Necron is a massive cost. Now, you know how I mentioned a little bit ago that the Quarks and the Eldoi were still bleeding? Yeah, the Eldoi Empire was dwarfing anything that the Necrons had. And again, some of the Eldoi were still a bit bitter, that millions of them died in the war in heaven due to the Necrons. So the Silent King would issue one last order to build massive tombs underneath planets, so that way the Necron species can hide, because the Necrons are truly immortal. The Eldoi are still mortal. The Eldoi are not immortal, and every great empire will fall. They do not have the benefit of time. The Necrons truly have the benefit of time. And so they would seal themselves in these tombs, and right after they sealed themselves in these tombs, the Silent King would hit a button and would get rid of all of the protocols all of the Dynasty members had, essentially giving free will back to the Necrons. And again, not to the individual Necrons, it's still just essentially a walking toaster, but individuality, and complete freedom to all of the different Necron dynasties. Sadly, wacky guys like Trajan can go Pokemon catching. The Silent King, so disgusted with his actions on where he led his species, would exile himself out of the Milky Way galaxy. Yes, he has been awake for 60 million years. He is the only Necron not to sleep. He would explore other neighbor galaxies in his time until eventually he saw something so horrific, so disgusting, so deplorable, your mother, that he would travel back to our galaxy and try to wake up the Necrons a little bit early, so that way they could stand up to this disgusting threat known as the Tyranids. Luckily though, their alarm clock was set for 60 million years and many of the dynasties were waking even without him. But the first dynasty to awake was this silly little guy called Trajan the Infinite, who awoke 10,000 years before the Necrons were supposed to wake up in year 30,000 and went around the Horus Heresy catching Space Marines, Space Marine legions, and whole-ass custodians, and even Thunder Warriors in essentially Pokemon balls known as Tesseract balls, where he can literally throw it at you and it'll catch stuff. So yeah, it's a Pokeball. Trajan, as incredibly interesting as he is, isn't the most he's definitely my favorite and the most interesting, but not the most important for the Necron as a race. Now, the Necrons began to wake up, and there was this one Necron house that, for whatever reason, now keep in mind, although the Necrons are really, really good, if you turn a PC off for like 20 years, it might not turn back on. So, there's one noble house where the leader of the Necron dynasty just didn't wake up. This caused all of the other members of the dynasty to go absolutely ballistic, cause a civil war to try to take charge of the Necron house. And one of these lower Necron nobles thought it would be a good idea to awake this ancient godlike general known as Emotech the Stormlord, thinking that Emotech would side with him and would give him the throne, because, oh, he woke him up. Now, this civil war was bad. It was tearing the Necron dynasty apart, and it got to the point where they were killing sleeping Necron nobles, or just not waking them up, because it was already too chaotic. Now, Emotech gets woken up, and the noble expects him to act like a servant. He does not. He kills the noble, and essentially goes around leading troops and killing every noble that gets in his way until he's in charge. Yeah, he took over that dynasty in like a day. Now, Emotech the Stormlord absolutely hates. He just hates the Silent King. And by now, the Silent King has made his way back to the Milky Way galaxy and is trying to rally the Necrons against the Tyranids, and possibly trying to get an audience with Gilliman, and is possibly going to try to cause a temporary peace deal between the Imperium and the Necrons. He already did something like this on a smaller scale with Dante, the Chapter Master of the Blood Angels, but I believe there's going to be an audience with Gilliman soon, especially given the fact that in lore, the Tyranids are becoming the new big bad in 40k, and Gilliman's trying to stop them, and who else is trying to stop them? Yeah, the Silent King. But anyway, back to Emotech the Stormlord, the Chad. Emotech is essentially going around and waking up Necron Tomb Lords, or going to already awoken Necron Tomb Lords and be like, okay, you can walk under me, or I can kill you. Many Necrons, being as prideful as they are, fought him and got absolutely bodied by Emotech. Emotech, now if I remember correctly, owns 88 Tomb Lords. Now that's not a lot given the Imperium owns 1 million worlds. One Necron Tomb Lord versus like 100 human Imperial worlds. I would bet my money on the Tomb Lord. Like, it's so much more advanced. Every single citizen is used to the best of their ability. Every single citizen is a mindless killing machine Terminator. So yeah, 80 words might not sound like too much, but that's a lot. Hell, I'm pretty sure he could solo the Tau Empire, if I'm being honest. Luckily, the Silent King is no slouch himself, and also owns dozens of Tomb Lords. In fact, if I remember rightly, he owns close to 100. And not to mention, it appeals like when Necrons submit and give their loyalty to the Silent King, it's almost like they become more powerful. It's like they regain something they've lost. Although, that's just speculative, I'm not sure. Now, there's a big possibility that Imhotep, the Stormlord, the greatest Necron general, and the Silent King might come to blows eventually, because the two hate each other. The Silent King wants to protect mortal life, so that way eventually they can take a mortal species and transfer their consciousness into that species, so that way the Necron can be flesh and blood again. Imhotep absolutely hates that. He absolutely hates that the Silent King trapped them in these metal bodies. And he absolutely hates that the Silent King is now trying to reverse what he did. He's just a hater. He hates that he did it, and he hates that he's trying to undo it. He's just a hater. Still, though, Imhotep is really cool. Also, despite the fact that Imhotep is, like, the most just Giga Chad, do not F with Necron possible, like, you can get away with messing with the Silent King. Like, Silent King has been fighting, normal, like, humans. And he will, when they have acts of bravery and they, fight honorably, he'll almost, like, let them go and, like, leave them a way to leave. He'll really honor enemy generals, even like human generals and space marines who fight honorably. Like, he'll straight up just let them go, like, if they surrender. And even if they're fighting and they don't surrender, he'll just give them a path to retreat. He's just very honorable and respects when humans, fight honorably. He loves that a lot. Imhotep doesn't kill. You could be the Marines Malevolent or the most honorable Space Marines ever, and he's going to exterminate you no matter what. Also, he really pissed off the Chapter Master of the Black Templars, so he is, like, embarrassed. Like, he could have killed him, but he left him alive just to kind of mess with him. He also whipped off his hand. So he went up to the Chapter Master of the Black Templars, beat him up, whipped off his hand, kicked him off a bridge, intentionally in a way to leave him alive, just so that way he could have, like, a nemesis. And it's not even like a nemesis. Anytime he shows back up to fight him, he just F's with him in the worst possible ways possible. So yeah, Imhotep is just a hater and a massive dick. Despite being the Necron you really don't want to get on his bad side the most, Trazen the Infinite is on his bad side, like, a lot. So you know why he's called the Stormlord? It's because he has this really cool staff that can cause, like, massive storms to destroy his enemies and to hide his forces, so his enemies can jump out of nowhere. Yeah, Trazen tried to steal it. Let that sink in. Trazen tried to steal from the most do not F with Necron ever. I just love Trazen. Trazen's just in it for the memes. Also, that guy Orkin woke back up and had, like, a 1,000-year prank off with, Trazen, so please read the Infinite and Divine. It is just so funny. Anyway, back to the main story. So the 4 Necrons that I know the most about, there are obviously other Necrons, like there's that one Dimension Necron who thinks he's still, in the Age of Flesh, but he also knows that he's a machine. And, now, again, I'm not going to talk about him really at all because I don't know anything about him. I know about these other 4 Necrons much more, so I'm not going to talk about Necrons that I have a very passing surface level knowledge on, because if you're watching this video, you probably know that as well, so I'm not going to try to waste your time. So the 4 Necrons that I know the most about, you have Trazen the Infinite, who's essentially just ass catch him. He's just going on pranking people, he's just messing around, he's just goofing off, collecting random stuff. You have Orkin, who's essentially the absolute pinnacle of I told you so, because he's the only Necron who didn't want to do this whole biotransference thing. You have the Silent King, who made a deal with Dante and is trying to chum up with humanity and, of course, exterminate the bugs. And then you have Imhotep the Stormlord, who's just a certified hater. So yeah, that's where the Necrons currently are in a setting. There's possibly a future Necron civil war between Imhotep the Stormlord and the Silent King. Now, the Silent King has a bunch of crazy machine crap that only he has, and he has a bigger dynasty, versus Imhotep the Stormlord, who in my personal opinion, Imhotep the Stormlord is not only the better commander of the two, he is the greatest commander, the greatest general, greatest tactician, greatest strategist of any being in the entire galaxy. I think he's the GOAT, even though he's just a massive hater. It's not just because he's so good. It's because he'll go out of his way just to be a dick. And he won't even kill you. He'll just have this massive plan that's picture perfect. And 90% of the plan is just him being a dick. If he actually took things seriously and, didn't just want to F with people, he would win in like 2 seconds. But he'll take time out of his day just to be a dick. I love him. He's the GOAT for that. Now, one of the more important things about Necrons, not so much as their, like, entire culture and dynasty system, like, again, it's just the most unfathomable. If you want a good summary on how the average Necron dynasty works, just look up Chinese history. Just look up Chinese dynasties. That's pretty much how Necron dynasties function. Although, of course, Emotech and the Silent King are kind of able to wrangle that up a little bit. Now, one dynasty that's just kind of chilling doing their own thing is, of course, Trajan. And Trajan has a perfect clone of Fulgrim, and that really pisses me off. I'm sorry, I'm going on a rant for a minute. Trajan has a perfect clone of Fulgrim, meaning that Fulgrim clone is never going to be in the setting again. Now, again, I know that Black Library authors have a thing where if an author comes up with a character or comes up with an idea and he leaves the company, no one will really touch it. They'll just kind of leave it. I respect that. I do respect that, but I think that's kind of dumb. Someone, for the love of God, just break Fulgrim out of that prison. For the love of God, I know that Whito who made Clone Grim left, but for the love of God, any of the Whitos, if you're listening to this, any of them, for the love of God, please have some kind of story where the Lion gets a vision from the Emperor to break Fulgrim out. I think it'd be really funny if Gilliman is just doing taxes one day and the Lion shows up on his office and a perfect clone of Fulgrim shows up in his office, like, at the same time, like both a redeemed Fulgrim and an awakened Lion, and that's like the first that Gilliman hears of brothers. I think that'd be really funny. Not to mention, I just love Fulgrim. I love Fulgrim before his fall. I think it'd be really cool to bring him back. This would also, you know, kind of... Anyway, side tangent over. One of the biggest things that Trajan did was he essentially went around Cadia when Abaddon was doing his Black Crusade, and this man single-handedly saved Cadia. Cadia was about to fall. Now, I know all the memes of Space 9/11, but Cadia was actually about to fall. Abaddon was about to just win. He was about to just objectively take over the planet through brute force. Trajan going around, unleashing custodians from the Great Crusade, Space Marines, like entire Grado Company Space Marines. Grado Company's 10,000 guys. He released dozens of Grado Companies, guard regiments, everything. He was just throwing crap at the wall to stop Abaddon. And he straight up stopped Abaddon. There were so many loyalist Space Marines, loyalist custodians, that Abaddon's forces lost Cadia. Cadia, straight up, was won because of Trajan. Until this little paint-eating lobotomite, Abaddon the Despoiler, went on a big temple tantrum that his Black Crusade failed, and so he essentially strapped some ships to a Blackstone fortress and Space 9/11'd it into Cadia, cracking Cadia into two pieces, which then left the Necron Pylon, which essentially is this massive device that kind of limits psychic energy, and the Necrons used it as a weapon against the old ones, because again, the Catan and the Necrons hate psychic stuff, especially the Catan. So they had these pylons everywhere, and Belisarius Cole was trying to get the pylon working, and, you know, Trajan kind of gave him a hand with that, on top of releasing his Pokemon to help. But unfortunately, with that pylon went from barely working, and that barely working pylon was holding the Eye of Terror back. And Trajan was able to get it working more, as opposed to like 10%. It was now working at like 30%, and it was like pushing back chaos. With Abaddon's little Black Fortress shenanigans, the planet was now cracked in half, and the pylon was also broken. So the Eye of Terror went from a big hurricane to whipping the Imperium in half.
To show you the power of flex tape, I saw this boat in half!
So yes, Abaddon, by destroying that Blackstone pylon, was able to whip the Imperium in half and, you know, plunge it into chaos. But we're not talking about those stupid primitives. We're talking about the Chad Necrons. And from now, that's kind of where the Necron story ends. Like, if I remember rightly, that was kind of, you know, one of the last notable things the Necrons had done. And I'm really looking forward for some Necron books. Now, keep in mind, I absolutely love Xenos books. Now, I think a big problem Black Library is having is way too many Space Marine books. It's like they have this massive selection, and they're almost limiting themselves by only having Space Marines. But keep in mind, with the Horus Heresy done, a ton of writers are going to be going over to 40k, and I really believe that the Necrons are going to be getting some love soon. Because, again, I believe Gilliman and the Silent King, and possibly the Lion, are going to have a meeting. And I think that's going to push the Necrons forward. At least I hope. Anyway, what's your opinion on the Necrons? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Who's your favorite? Should I read more about other Necrons, like the Dementia General Necron? Should I do a video on Praising the Infinite? Yeah, I probably will. Who's your favorite Necron? Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and as I mentioned in the audio part of this video, some postable notes on the YouTube channel. I would like to say, I am so thankful. I would genuinely like to say, I love you guys. Thank you so much for getting me to 100 subs. As I'm recording this now, I'm at 112. Can you believe that? I finally have enough space on my phone. I deleted so much stuff. So I can, constantly record videos. I promise to release a video every single Sunday. Possibly, I'm going to try to do 2 videos a week, but a guaranteed 1 video a week. I'm also going to be releasing YouTube Shorts on Sunday. And I just gotta say, thank you so much for supporting me. Thank you so much. Even if you don't want to like, subscribe, comment, which you should. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything, and it makes me happy. Still, just thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And also, I gotta point this out. I recently changed my name from 40k Topics with Justin to Lisp Pamel. And the main reason why I did this is because the sheer ungodly amount of comments mentioning my lisp. I just gotta say, if you like listening to me babble on about random stuff, thank you. If you like my weird, just unholy, lispy voice, then go ahead. Please watch more of my videos. If you like poking fun of it, making fun of it, whatever, please go ahead. I want to make you happy. If you like the sound of it, go. If you like the sound of it and you want to support me, go ahead. If you like the sound of it and you want to laugh, go ahead. It makes me happy to make everyone happy. I feel like this voice was almost kind of a blessing because it makes everyone happy one way or the other. And one thing I did actually think is really, really funny is I had 1 or 2 comments in a previous video kind of hinting that my voice is fake, like, oh, how long can this guy keep this voice up, stuff like that. And I think that's absolutely hilarious. Me and my friend were talking the other day, and I mentioned that, and both of us had a good laugh about that. If I was faking my voice, I would be making it sound cool and intimidating, not like this. But anyway, I just gotta say, hope you enjoy listening to my relatively unique voice. I have a very heavy lisp. I'm not gonna say where I live. I'm not gonna, dox myself or anything. But I live somewhere in the south, and I have a very heavy lisp. On top of that, I have a very bad speech impediment, so double whammy. But on top of this, despite living in the south, so having a weird southern lispy accent with a speech impediment, I essentially grew up watching The Simpsons, so that's a little weird kind of voice thing being added, because, you have little kids watching Peppa Pig, they sound British. And so that's where I'm at, with this just unholy cacophony of horrible voices. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. And I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.